Hey, welcome to the Pig Daily, episode number 28, guys. Today it is the 28th of June. I love how the days have been lining up the last couple of days. It is the 28th of June, 2016, and we are going to be talking about the art of defense. Now, today is a beginner basics episode, so we are focusing on trying to explain things for newer players. That being said, we're still going to go reasonably detailed on one or two things. We're still going to talk about the theory, so by no means is this not going to be useful if you're quite an experienced player. What we're going to talk about today is, there's so many areas of defense to talk about, right? I sent out a tweet yesterday and I was like, hey guys, I'm doing this topic. What are some topics you'd like to see me talk about? And there was like 37 different responses, and I was just like, okay, that's defense for you. Whether it's a topic on defending all-ins, holding cheese, scouting specific timings, or reacting to specific attacks, there's so many different things to talk about. So by no means is this going to be absolutely comprehensive. We're going to revisit this topic over and over and over again. And and yeah, so today, what are we covering? We're going to talk about, first of all, just kind of making sure, getting used to having spotter units on the map, seeing when attacks are coming, and also trying to identify them and categorize it and figure out if it's actually something which is kind of scary or not. We're also just going to talk about what your initial, very standard generic response should be. Now, this isn't necessarily defense against early cheese. This is just defending in general. Attacks, they could be early, they could be in the mid game. We're going to look at a few examples of reasonably fast attacks, and we're going to use those as examples because I think those are the things people are most commonly looking for. But really, at any point throughout the game, we're going to talk about what your standard response should be, a set order of kind of things you can just apply to almost any aggression. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, so we're going to look at defending like a tank marine timing. With Zerg, we're going to be looking a lot at positioning. We're going to be looking at using SimCity as Protoss to hold a Roach Ravager Zergling, very fast all-in timing attack. And then we're also going to be just looking at holding a Cannon Rush as Terran at the end. As I know, right up to even GM, I see players losing to Cannon Rushes once in a while, which, you know, it's always interesting because there's different skill levels, and there's these whole areas of the game where if you talk to a pro streamer or a pro gamer and you ask them like, oh, how do you stop Cannon Rushes Terran? They'll just kind of scoff and be like, that's bad. But it's very hard as a newer player to see the content when you actually like see the person just crushing it and exactly why, and you see the details of that. So you've kind of got to go through the whole learning process yourself. So anyway, guys, let's dive on into game and let's take a look at the first one. I didn't want it on the fancy overlay today. I just wanted to have it on the regular replay so we can see all the different details. But what we're going to be seeing here, big thanks to Seeker, by the way, played a couple games. Seeker from Team Liquid, you guys might recognize from translating a lot of the articles and being an awesome mod over there. Took the time to play a few games with me yesterday, and I just wanted to kind of showcase some positioning. Well done, Muffin Man in chat. Well done. Some high-level chatter coming from Twitch chat right now. But yeah, so what are we going to be talking about is a marine tank attack. We're going to just fast forward. We're going to see like not necessarily the closest kind of level of skills here, not necessarily the most like super hard to stop tank timing. He said he wasn't particularly familiar with it, but he did a pretty decent job. But what we're going to be looking at is all the different things I do to defend. Now, one of the most important things that you need to be focusing on in general, in your play, no matter what your race, is trying to get vision on the map and some sort of spotting units out on the map. This is something where when you're first starting out, you're not as quick at reacting to things. So if you don't have any vision outside your base, say you couldn't see here, your opponent can attack you, you have no idea they're coming until they get to your base, and things can get really bad very quickly because you just don't see the attacks moving out. You've got no time to mentally prepare, to make any sort of response, and everything ends up chaotic very quickly. So one of the most important thing for newer players to focus on, and something which really does help their play a massive amount, is simply making sure you have a spotting unit outside your opponent's base. And sometimes even more than that. If we look at the minimap here, as a Zerg player, it's very easy. Because you got these cheap expendable Zerglings, and you've got Overlords. So look at this, we've got an Overlord sitting on a piece of high ground where they won't be able to see him unless they've got flying units there to spot it. And he's going to see, if we think about how our opponent has to come across the map to our base, they're going to have to go right past that Overlord. So that's one way of seeing it. But also we've got a Zergling here at the front to see when he moves out. And what you want to do is you always want to do this. Now, at lower levels, at super high levels, if you're playing Terran or Protoss, you'll see a lot of players just not put a unit outside their opponent's base, especially through the early stages. The reason is at the level they're playing, the other race might have a mobility advantage at that point. They know that any unit they send out there is just going to get cleaned up by just the standard units. So they know there's certain windows where they won't necessarily have that vision. And as a newer player, it's very scary because you think, well, what if I get stuck in one of those windows where I don't have vision? Usually it's just not the case, because players aren't that active with their units up until higher levels. So even just sending an Adept or a Zealot or a Probe and just leaving it outside their base at all times to see if an attack's coming is always going to be fantastic. With Terran, you've got SCVs or Marines to leave there as well. And using these spotter units is going to be great. Later on in the game, you start to have things like Observers as Protoss, which of course, just leaving one outside their base to see when an attack's coming is splendid. It's beautiful. And as Terran, I mean, once again, just Stim Marines, and of course you can use scans to do more serious verifiable scouting as well. But the most important thing is just to have this vision, and that's the moment we're looking for, right when Terran moves out in this case. So you're just going about your business, but you really want to try and keep an eye on your minimap. And as long as you've got this little circle here on the minimap, then you're going to feel safe. And you're just going to be going about your business. So let's put this on my camera. Just spread in some creep, build in some drones. And it's something where whenever you're not looking at your screen, like you steadily train yourself to always glance at your minimap. We see there, I glanced down and I saw, wow, a tank evac, a bunch of Marines very early. And as an experienced pro player, I said, that is a scary attack. This timing, exactly what I saw, this is a scary attack. Now, that's a hard call to make, but that is the most important skill which you actually develop. And this seems so bloody minor. You're like, all right, like cool, you identified the attack as scary, but what did I see? I only saw like a handful of Marines and a tank. I didn't really get a good glimpse of the army. So if you're not as experienced, one of the best things to do is go like, oh wait, what the fuck was that? Like I just lost my vision outside his base. Did he just come out and like just clear the unit and go back? Was this actually a big scary attack? Immediately just grab another unit, send it down across that map and actually verify. I'm not sure if we're going to do that in this game. I think we didn't end up having to. Yeah, we had the Overlord here as well to verify. But the important idea is to really just look at the army and make that assessment. Choose, is this scary or is it not? And this is something where there's no set rule. You can't say, oh, I'll always get a player asking something like, oh, do you calculate the cost of their units? And if it's equal to or more than your units, does that count as scary? Realistically, you're not going to be doing that sort of mental arithmetic while you're playing. I mean, maybe some of you are geniuses and you can actually do that, in which case, fantastic, that's awesome. But most players can't do that. A lot of StarCraft is by feel. When you're first starting out, you're going to suck at identifying when an attack's scary or not. You're going to make missed calls all the time. That's part of the learning process. The important thing is to try and figure it out in hindsight. You can go into the replay and you can do cute little things and you can go, all right, let's take a look at this. Now, army supply. And you go, oh, okay, army supply. Now, in this case, I actually was like preemptively building units, like way too many. Way more than I should have, considering what I'd seen earlier. But you can see like, okay, 30 army supply. All right, what do we got? You know, okay, two tanks, 15 Marines. Yeah, this is a pretty powerful attack. It's not like crazy powerful, but yeah, this is a pretty strong attack. All right. And you can start to make that assessment based on the situation. And every situation is a little bit different, but you can just say, this is scary or this is not scary. And as silly as that, sort of difference sounds, it's actually the most important thing. So if it's not scary, you can just continue with your build as normal. You just kind of assess it, obviously in comparison to your own army. If you've got no units out, any attack is going to be at least a little bit scary, right? Like, you know, you're going to build more units and so on. But if it's really like, you look at it like, that's less units than I already have at home, you say, that's not scary at all, just keep doing my standard stuff. I barely even need to respond to this. Maybe send another unit onto the map to see if he keeps pushing, but, you know, you don't really need to stress out. However, once you do assess an attack as scary, this is where you need to start having an organized list of things. And really the most important thing, whoops, this is our little list of reactions. So any aggression whatsoever, we want to use this. And the most important thing, which people don't realize, is actually number one, supply. So when you see someone coming to attack you right through to high levels, one of the most common things that happens, especially if people weren't expecting the attack, they're very surprised by it. They're a little bit like, whoa, what is this? What the hell? Or where did this come from? They get supply blocked, either during the fight or just before the fight. And this happens so damn often. The first thing you should always be doing whenever you see an attack, and you should really be training yourself to do this, both as a veteran or a novice player, build more supply. If you're Zerg, build more overlords. Terran, build more depots. Protoss, build more pylons. Number one, often you'll lose a few overlords on the map or as they push into your base. Likewise, pylons. Pylons have pylon cannon now. That's like the number one target when a person is attacking into a Protoss player. These days, Protoss players, a lot of them still haven't gotten used to this idea of, dude, your pylon cannons are your food. Build like 7 more pylons the moment you see the opponent coming at you, because he's going to be focusing them down. And there's nothing worse than not being able to produce during a fight. Likewise with Terran, you've got depots in your wall. You're going to be losing depots during the fight. You've got to get these extra supply structures down as the number one thing. Number two, build more units. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? It's like, yeah, you need things to defend and fight. The third one is the most complex point. It's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of today. Defensive positioning. This is something which is different in every situation. There's so many factors to take into account. And we're going to talk about a few of those situations, but only a couple of them. We've also got the macro cycle. The idea there is if you've got a little bit of spare time after you've built supply structures, after you've built units, still spend your money. If you've got a bit of extra money, queue up some more workers, add some upgrades, add some tech. Why are we doing that when we're worried about an attack coming? Because you know you're going to be focusing 100% of your attention on defending, right? Which means you're not going to be macroing. So you know almost undoubtedly, whenever a big fight's going to happen in StarCraft, you're going to mess up your macro a bit. So already you tell yourself, okay, let's just try and do some macro now. Clear our macro tasks so that there's less time where we neglect the macro. So because we know we're getting neglected a little bit, but let's try and minimize that. Keep it to a minimum and really get on top of that. All right, so defensive positioning is the big thing. That's what we're going to be talking about pretty much for the rest of today, going through a few different scenarios. So let's go back into game. In this case, it's a Marine tank push. Now, this is not necessarily the strongest. There's actually a few replays versus this guy who always stream cheats against me. He always does a 1-base Marine tank liberator push. And I thought that would be perfect. That would be the perfect one. And I couldn't find any of my really good defenses against it. I could only find replays of me like almost dying to it and attacking into it, not using defensive positioning well. Anyway, let's take a look at this. So he's going to abuse this positioning here. Notice his siege tanks can shoot on the ramp. They've got this really beautiful position. As I said before, Seeker's never really done a timing like this before. So he's getting kind of too many add-ons. He's not keeping up his unit production. He's got a reactor on the starport because he just wasn't sure of the exact timings of how to make this sort of style work. Instead of spending the gas on these, he should just be building more tanks, medevacs one at a time, and just building Marines out of unupgraded barracks. That way he could have a few more units. Being a little bit of a higher level player and someone who's a little bit more experienced, I'm able to just kind of overwhelm him. But let's ignore the numbers. Let's ignore the fact that I have more stuff. Let's look at the exact reaction in terms of how I defend. And this is a great example of a situation where one army has superior range to the other army. Now, this is something you always want to assess. You want to say, okay, Marines, tanks, what do I have? Roaches and Zerglings. Roaches have 4 range. Siege tanks, what is the range of siege tanks? Does anyone even know? Is that like 13 or something? Let's take a look. I mean, that's not in siege mode. We'll have to wait till these drop and we'll find out. But Marines are 5 range, tanks are like 11, 13 range, something crazy like that. and he's going to push out. Now, we saw him push out. Remember, we spotted him leaving the base. So what have we done? We've grabbed all of our units that we already had on the map. We've put them on a separate hotkey. We've taken them off our main army hotkey, and we actually sent them around to flank. Let's go back and look at how I gave that command as well. Just very calmly, I've grabbed them and I've queued them up. I've said, go down here. And once he's up here outside my base, I'll bring them around behind and we're going to come in and flank with them. And this is really important if you don't have the range advantage. If you don't have the range advantage, or if you're going in with melee units, you don't want to be attacking from one direction, especially if you take into account splash damage. Siege tanks have splash damage. So what we want to do is we want to surround the army and we want to come in from all directions. The reason is terrain, choke points, anything that's all blocked up always favors the ranged army, even if they didn't have splash damage. The reason is your units simply have to get closer to attack. They don't have as much range, so your units have to get in closer. Now, if you come from multiple sides, you're going to have more surface area in which to close with the Terran army, which means your units aren't all blocking each other up, and they're going to be able to get on top of that Terran army quickly. Also, whenever you're dealing with one of these very fast pushes where they're kind of just sieging up in an annoying position, but they're not pushing right in really hard because they want you to attack into this nasty position where he's kind of protected in this little pocket, cutting off reinforcements. So this is another thing where defensive positioning works out really damn well. As Zerg, you can almost always cut off reinforcements like this. You can usually, do a maneuver like this whenever you've got the more mobile army, whenever you've got the more melee or short-ranged army, and it just makes a really big difference. We see now he's feeling the pressure to push in because his reinforcements are being cut off. And once again, what were we talking about? Surface area and spread. So we're spreading these units out. Like I said, remember, we don't want them to be all clumped up running into each other. Not only will this minimize splash, but it'll allow them to close with the enemy faster. We're doing the same up here. We're spreading our units out so that when we do a move, the units are going to come in very evenly, and they're really just going to do very well here. So we're finally start to come in, and we see there, look at that, the units are already in a perfect concave. Because we spread them out, we see the power of that defensive positioning. The units from behind intercepting the reinforcements. We lose almost nothing breaking that position. Like I said, we did have more stuff in this example, but we can see the power of defensive positioning. Number one, cutting off the reinforce, especially with siege tank pushes, and that you want to do the same thing as Protoss. If you see a fast, scary tank push, and you think, I'm not ready to hold this straight away, or you know what, I think he's super all in, I've got more bases, I've got more economy. If you can just buy time, then you'll be ahead. Remember, we've got a third base. We've got 1, 2, 3 bases. He does not have a third. Every second that goes by, we're building more units. So as long as we can cut off the reinforce, remember, with these tank pushes, they want to abuse the positioning. They don't push in very quickly. They've always going to give you a bit of time. So you rally your units back behind the hatchery. You keep your units back. You cut off reinforcements with a section. You wait a little bit so that you can let that economy kick in, let more units come out, and then you come in with that huge, huge swell from all sides. Just look at this, spreading units out on all sides, even on top of the ramp, not letting those run down that ramp. And this is just a beautiful, beautiful engagement. Now, a lot of people will look at just how perfect that concave formed, and they might think, oh, I can't do that. Remember, my units there were not perfectly arranged. They were just kind of spread. They were just kind of spread out, and when you attack with them, they will automatically form a beautiful concave. That's just the way the AI works in StarCraft. It does half your work for you. So that works very nicely. And that's that. The game's pretty much over from there. GG's. Okay, so let's hop into the next game and let's talk about a few other examples of defensive positioning. There we talked about a very specific one where they push in really slow and they kind of take their time with it. So in that situation, they love it if you just keep accidentally walking units into them. Ooh, I thought I turned that off. Get off there, build. We don't need that point there anymore. Though we will refer to it again. So with those pushes, yeah, if they push in slower, they really want you to kind of bleed into them from one angle, or to just attack too early from one angle when you don't have enough units. They want to abuse that ranged advantage. And that's the other thing about a ranged advantage army. If you've got the superior range, you can kind of attack in and then pull back. Attack in and pull back without fully committing. But if they've got a far superior ranged army to you, in that case tanks and marines, if you attack into it and then pull back, like, you're not going to do any damage because you're walking into their fire. If you then get close enough to actually throw a round of attacks, this is how I roach attacks, by the way. If you get close enough to do that, you're hopping like two tank volleys on the way in, a tank volley on the way out. Like, you're going to lose so much stuff. So it really means that you need to be very decisive when you actually take the fight. So range advantage is one of the most important things you guys need to consider whenever you're defending. Do I have it? If I've got it, sweet, let's defend behind my Sim City. If I don't have range advantage, I've got to try and fight in the open. I've got to try and get a flank. I've got to try and cut off reinforcements, and I've got to do one decisive engage. Now, what we're about to watch is holding a Zerg all-in as Protoss. So big thanks to Chankem, my teammate over here, who hopped on, and he actually smashed me a bunch of times with this dirty gas pool hatch roachling all-in. This is the one game where I held it. I finally got on top of my defense a little bit. Actually, to be honest, I think he just executed poorly this game. But let's ignore it. Let's ignore that. Let's imagine my defense was perfect. We're going to talk about the theory of it anyway. So what we're going to see is what I call the therapy build from Chankim. It's gas, pool, 17, 17, 18 hatch. And then because you get these early Zerglings out, it's really hard for your opponent to know what's coming next. Because you've got like super fast Zergling speed. And then they just make a bunch of roaches and Zerglings and kill you. Now, there's little things you can always do. Like I said, scouting. I scouted the third, saw no third in this game. And I was like, oh, no third at 3:30. That's pretty late, even though he went gas pool. So that gives me the first indication. But really, are we talking about scouting today? No, scouting's its own topic. I don't want to talk about scouting too much today because scouting is its own vast topic. And we're going to have different daily episodes for those. We've already got a topic on scouting Zerg and kind of how to identify different attacks coming our way. But let's just talk about that structure which we've been going on and on and on about today, as we talked about. First of all, have the spotting units outside the base. So in this game, well, like I said, there's certain points in the game where your opponent has mobility. He had Zergling speed, my Adept couldn't be on the map. So I sent my Mothership Core a little bit further outside my base to try and see if there was anything coming. So this is going to give me a little bit of forward warning. Isn't that nice? So right at this moment, we are going to see exactly what's going on with the Mothership Core. And let's take a little look at our wall. Because our wall here is, well, it's not perfect. I actually don't like the pylons like backing up on each other, because technically if someone aims a corrosive bile just perfectly between those pylons, they can hit both of them. But the idea here is the pylons are not super exposed. There's big meaty buildings in front of them. So this is something which is very important. Why is this important? We're playing against Zerg. We know there's always a threat of lots of speedlings running in. Lots of roaches and lings and Zerglings attacking, as happens in this game. So what we've specifically done is kept the pylon a little bit more towards the rear. And we've even built a secondary gate here. Now what you'll notice with this gate is you might be like, well, that's kind of weird. We've got a natural choke right where that sentry and adept are standing. That's normally where you hold position your units. However, so right here. However, now we've got a backup choke between the gateway and the pylon there as well. So anywhere in this whole little corridor that we've created, this little kind of corridor that bends there, we can hold position a unit and it will keep the choke tight. Also, it creates a choke point here. Another really great spot to hold adepts in. So wherever you have these choke points, you are limiting surface area. You are using SimCity. Now, you might think, well, adepts aren't really the most ranged unit. Do they really want to, use the SimCity, use the terrain? Yes, because you're fighting Zerg. Zerglings are always going to be the main thing. And even though an adept can only throw a frisbee like a few meters, it's usually good enough to deal with Zerglings. You've still got the ranged advantage. We've also got pylon cannon to think about. That cannon has like 6 or 7 range. It's got pretty good range as well. So all of that kind of gives you, the incentive in order to use these choke points, create these walls in this terrain. So we talked about the first response is more pylons. let's go back to when we first spot it. And this is something I actually fucked up this game. Excuse my French. We should have put down more pylons right now. Because, remember what we said, you're going to be building units to defend the attack. That uses up supply. We already don't have that much supply free. Not only that, but these pylons are prime targets. They are going to get focused for sure. So we really need to put more pylons down. And as Protoss, it's a very special scenario, putting down pylons. You need to think, like, where is the best spot to put these pylons? And you want them near your front, powering these buildings. Because if these 2 pylons go down, we lose our core. If Warp Gate will be finished, so that won't matter. But we'll lose these gateways. So maybe a pylon here. Maybe a pylon up here. Just anywhere that's powering these frontal structures without just being like derp exposed at the front. You just want it to be at the back, and that's going to be pretty decent. Like I said, this hold is far from perfect. This was, I think, this was actually the first game we played where I got kind of lucky. And warp in units. So we've just morphed these warp gates, and the first thing we should be doing is just make units. So we built pylons. No, we didn't. We skipped it. Uh-oh. And now we see the downside of that. We didn't build pylons. We're supply blocked. We managed to get our first round of adept warp-ins here, thankfully. And we also get to see that we're pulling probes into the fight. And this is where we get to see some very important things. So, pulling workers into engagements. When to do it, and why to do it. Why to do it? Me speak good words. Once again, it's about assessing an attack and how scary it is. Now, this is something you learn with experience. As I said, I can't just give you general rules for every single situation. But in this particular scenario, we are playing against a very popular all-in attack. This attack needs to pretty much kill you. You can lose almost every probe on, or actually you can lose every probe on your natural and still be ahead after this attack. How do I know this? Let's go into game and do a quick analysis. Now, you can figure this out by looking at a replay of your own game. You might not realize the first time you face this situation, but once you've faced it before, you get better and better at doing the maths. Let's take a look. 16 drones, 3 on gas, that's 19 drones, and only 3 more, 22 drones. This is super all in. So if we go back to when this is first hitting, let's take a look at that worker disparity. 35 probes to 22 drones. Not only that, you've also got to take into account that a Zerg has shit tech. If a Zerg is ever attacking you, they just don't have any follow-up. There's not even a third hatchery, which our probe spotted, by the way. Our probe saw there was no third. Not only is there no third, but there's just no tech. There's no lair, there's no evos. And you might think, well, what does Protoss have? Simply having a robo finished by the end of this attack and having glaives is actually beautiful. That's actually very high up the tech tree compared to a Zerg who has Zergling speed. He has nothing else going for him. So even if you're down on probes a little bit, you can come back as the Protoss player. Which tells us, if we lost 13 probes, we'd be even on workers, we'd still be way ahead. Okay, so things start to make sense now. In hindsight, we say, okay, well, how could I recognize this again in game? And I look at this and I say, next time I see a hell of a bunch of roaches and zerglings attacking my wall when I have only 2 gateway units and my warp gate's just finishing, if I'm at this point of the game and they're already attacking me with a really scary force, then I'm just going to say, okay, he's all in. We can definitely afford to pull probes. The most important thing is to keep our production up, keep pylons up at the front, and to hold the wall. Hold door. Hold the door. Hold the door. That's the most important thing. So obviously we're going to activate a pylon cannon as soon as he comes in. Pylon cannon, one of the most important parts of Protoss defense. But here's the important part. We pulled probes. Now notice, because he didn't have many Zerglings at the moment, probes aren't going to really do that much. So this is something where you need to start taking into assess what can you really use probes for. Let's take a look at my notes. Make sure I wrote some really good notes down for this episode, and I haven't even been looking at them at all. I just want to make sure I haven't forgotten any of the key worker micro points there. Okay, yeah. So pulling these workers is often the difference between surviving, right? One of the most important things, though, is how do you actually use them? Now, a lot of the time, if it's like a really early rush, say someone's spine crawler rushing you, they've pulled all their drones in a Zerg vs. Zerg into your base, you just need to fight with your drones, right? Like, you need to just make sure you've got surface area. So it's the same sort of scenario we were talking about in that previous game where we surrounded the tank push. I know that sounds really silly. to think like, oh yeah, you got to go for the drone surround, but that's actually what you need. A lot of players, when they try to pull workers, they pull them too late. So what ends up is they pull all their workers and they've already lost all their other units, so they don't have any other units behind them. So already it's like, well, your workers don't deal a lot of damage. They're mainly there to buffer. That's one of the best things workers can do, is absorb a lot of damage, especially early on. These small attacks, there's not a lot of units. They absorb damage, so that's number one. Number two is, if they are going to attack, they need surface area. There's so many of them, they really need to surround the targets that are attacking them. So if you pull them too late, and you just kind of attack with them in a tight mineral line where only 4 or 5 can fight at a time, against 4 or 5 Zerglings, they're kind of going to get shreked. So you really need to start thinking about when and where to use them. If there were Zerglings flooding into my natural in this particular scenario, I might, if they came into the mineral line or up here, then I'd try to get probes on all sides of them. I'd try to kind of get my units around them and surround. But in this scenario, it's mostly Roaches and Ravagers that are left. So I'm saying to myself, I just need to block you from walking in, first of all. So at first I A-moved, but I realized that most of them couldn't get surface area. And what we did here is we actually do hold position micro. So very quickly, notice they're attacking, and that's the point where we realize, uh-oh, they're all getting killed really quickly. They're not doing a lot of damage. Excuse me, really should be speaking from the diaphragm, shouldn't I? Yeah, so these probes, at this point, I went hold position. And you're going to notice this very, very stark change between how the probes are getting treated. So they're fighting, the pylon goes down. Bam, they're all dying, and then hold position. And at this moment, the AI of the enemy units will stop attacking your workers and will start attacking other things. Hold position micro has saved so many pros in so many important games. This is so essential. It makes such a big difference. All you need to do is press hold position with them in a choke point, and your enemy units are just going to try and headbutt past these units, because suddenly, if your workers aren't attacking, they don't have the same attack priority or threat. Threat is a word a lot of people like to call it. They say certain units have levels of threat. So for instance, a Void Ray will always attack a Marine over a Marauder because the Marine is a threat. The Marine can shoot up, the Marauder can't, therefore it attacks it. In this scenario, probes, they're tasering, they got the little lasers out, they're a threat. The moment they hold position, suddenly they aren't a threat, and the units just treat them as a building. They're just like, just ignore it, try to fight the units. The thing is, if you hold position them in a key choke point, then suddenly they actually obstruct what's going on. And keep in mind, this is StarCraft, there's so much chaos on the screen. A lot of players don't realize a hold position has happened. We see here, these probes are now just being ignored. Look at these Zerglings. They're all just derping around, trying to get past. These probes, they're not a full wall, but they're really slowing down this attack. Now, imagine if we had put down more pylons earlier. Right now, we would not be trying to repower 2 of our gateways. So we see we made a huge mistake by not putting down those extra pylons. We didn't follow the first rule. And what could have been a super clean hold, where we just shut this down right now, we hold this location, we hold the wall, we don't even need to Hodor or anything. Like, we just hold the door and win. We kill all the douchebags that come out of the door. Easy peasy. And GG's. But, because we can't warp in more Adepts right now, even though we've got 700 minerals, we're in a really nasty position. Once again, attacking through a choke point. Also, we actually don't even have enough probes to surround, so we're probably going to do a hold position there. I really hope we do. But at the moment, they're A-moved. So we should have done a hold position there. Instead, we A-moved. If those probes just held position against the Adept, the Zerglings would just be trying to headbutt past those probes. Instead, all the probes are going to go down. So a bit of a sloppy A-move there. But gateways are getting back up. We're warping in more Adepts. The Mothership Core is doing crazy amounts of damage to all the Ravagers. This Adept in that choke point is still alive. 12 kills. So look at this. This choke point was so damn vital. And this is what we're talking about. Whenever you can use SimCity or Terrain, if you have the range advantage, it will be so valuable. And this Adept, look at him, he's just chilling. He's got glaives now. 7 kills, 8 kills. And the Zerg just can't get proper surface area on him and says, look, let's go kill the other units we can actually get surface area on. And that Adept is just killing everything. Now, a lot of Protoss players would feel like it's game over at this point, but remember what we said, we're actually up 4 probes. That means we're infinitely ahead right now. Infinitely. Like, it's actually insane how far ahead we are. Making that assessment is something which it takes a lot of experience to make. But generally, as a good rule, unless you made a massive screw-up, if your opponent's hitting you at an unreasonably fast timing with a scary, crazy number of units, and you don't understand why, it usually just means they didn't really build a lot of workers. They didn't build a lot of economy. So just being calm and very measured in your defense is going to allow you to do well. Up here, let's talk about those Zerglings breaking into the main base quickly. And let's look at how we micro that. So Zerglings come into the main. So we pulled the probes. And we did some really fancy micro there where we pulled the probe he was focusing and we clicked it on the minerals, so it pathed directly through our own probes and then got to safety. Because we were still dealing with aggression at the front, we'd literally just A-moved a bunch of probes to deal with it. And then we sent them back to mining. Now when he comes in and starts attacking our probes again, once again, we did that pull back the weak probe, A-move the other probes, and deal with it the best we can. He's going to come in again, but once you've got glaives up, you've got immortals and sentries building, it is going to be over. So all about using that defensive positioning based on the situation. In this scenario against a very fast Zerg all-in where, let's be honest, most of that attack was Zerglings. The vast majority of it was. There was the initial little ball of roaches, like 7 roaches, 2 or 3 of who turned into Ravagers, but the majority of that attack was Zerglings. Now if that was a mass Ravager attack, suddenly using the SimCity, using the wall when you've only got Adepts for the most part out, well, it's not that great. Why is it not that great? Because you've got the shorter ranged army. But that army was not really a Ravager attack. A lot of people say, oh, it's a big Ravager attack. Nope, that was a Speedling attack with a couple of Roaches and Ravagers with it. The pylon cannons, the Adepts, had a far superior range advantage, therefore buying time, using the choke points allowed the Adepts to get value, they allowed the Mothership Core to get value, and that's what ended up holding that. So just using that defensive positioning for the greater good. Oh wow, there was a host. That must have been from Base Trade, considering there's a billion viewers on the stream right now. Thank you so much to Base Trade, I really appreciate that. I'm assuming it was you guys. Thank you, everyone who's hanging out. So guys, we are going to look at one last replay, or actually 2 last replays quickly to finish things off. Before we look at that though, I have a really funny piece of history to share with you guys, because we've been talking a lot about this range advantage, right? We've been talking about this whole thing. And, oh, you know what's really funny? I forgot to put my replays over. I'm a genius. Yeah. Because my episodes are always so well prepared. I actually had to play a lot of games to try and prepare for today, but that's fine. The replays are right here, so it's all good. So we've got a couple of Cannon Rush replays we'll look at, but before we look at that, I want to talk more about pulling workers and the range advantage. And I want to show you guys one of the funniest pieces of history, because this just cracks me up. So let's go back about 3 years, almost 3 years now, to a special time in StarCraft's history.
Here we go again. Is he doing?
And this is Elfie versus Stardust. I can't even remember what tournament this was, but this is one of the funniest moments where Elfie is stuck on 2 base. Stardust has a fully mining third. The main's mined out for Elfie, so he's literally just pulled about 15 probes into his army in a mass Colossus Archon battle. A mass Colossus Archon engagement. And Elfie being Elfie, the god of PvP. I don't know if you guys are too familiar with Elfie back in Wings of Liberty and HOTS, but this guy has always been a god of PvP. And he actually comes in here, and what we see here is he just is using these probes to absorb a few more shots. He's down 36 supply, and 30 supply, and that's all in army supply. Equal workers. And we're actually going to see the probes make a little bit of a difference here, but what really makes the difference here is the range advantage. So we talked before about the range advantage and how if you've got the range advantage, you want to use your SimCity, you want to hide behind your buildings, right? You want to hide behind the terrain, the choke points. But this is Colossus versus Colossus. Archons versus Archons. Charge lots versus charge lots. This is an identical composition where you both have ranged armies. And this is a very special scenario. If you both have ranged armies, what always takes precedence, especially in large fights, is the concave. All that matters is having surface area. If you're not really sure what the concave is, as today is a beginner basics episode, go back to my How to Get Better Micro episode and we talk all about concaves. But for this episode, it's all about just the concave. It's about having the surface area so that your units can all be attacking at the same time, so that you don't have any exposed part of your battle line where those units all get focused down and just fried instantly. What we see in this particular game is a really funny combination of Elfie not only realizing that pulling workers can help offensively here because he's got no defensive use, just to absorb a few more attacks. Remember we were talking about how they buffer. You want them in front of your army. But he actually gets the superior positioning. So Stardust is going to fail to use the positioning correctly, and he's going to get choked up behind his buildings. Let's take a look at the engage.
Stardust actually getting caught by these time warps. Really fantastic time warps. Does Stardust have enough autosis? The Archons live strong. I think he does. The probe's actually coming off. He does have a slight lead in Colossus count, but actually, look at that. It does turn around. More Zealots coming in from the side. All of a sudden, there's 3 Colossus to 1. I tell you, that is the difference between going into a choke and not, and the difference between time warps and not, Apollo. Great moves here by Elfie. You might be able to... Stardust knows.
And Stardust actually lost this game. This is just so silly because, I mean, you're just not meant to win here as Elfie. But this all talks about defensive positioning. I didn't actually have a really good replay showing kind of defensive positioning in concaves, but let's take a look at this one more time and let's really just kind of focus on concave. So what we see from Elfie is he's going to move his army down, and he's going to have this big wide open area from here all the way down here. Huge even line with no interruptions. Meanwhile, Stardust on the other side of things, if he had his units spread in the mineral line and down behind the mineral line over on this side, things might be okay. But he screws up, doesn't spread these units to the left, and his entire army ends up trying to squeeze between this choke point. What would have been much better for Stardust is if he was set up in front of his Nexus, kind of where Elfie is. Because then Elfie would have had to attack through that relative choke point there, and Stardust would have had a great position. In hindsight, I'm sure Stardust says, I wish I just abandoned the base, pulled the probes off, and then just retook the base elsewhere, or retook after Elfie pushed out of it. Because the only way Stardust could lose here is by taking an atrocious engagement. And that's exactly what Stardust does. Look, his entire army all tries to squeeze through this tiny choke point. Remember we were talking about having units clumped up against Splash. That's another big thing here. It's not just the range advantage. It's also the fact that they're all clumped up on top of each other. So the splash damage also multiplies. But there also is the factor that because they're all clumped on top, some of them are behind each other. Like there's actually a few Colossus underneath this dirty explosion. Everything of Stardust is getting focus fired. And notice the Colossus of Elfie are actually focus firing on the Colossus of Stardust because they were all kind of clumped up and they were all trying to get in range. And even though Stardust was up, a lot of army supply ends up falling apart. So that's an important piece of history there where we can see where the literal only time that a probe pool has worked aggressively against Mass Colossus Archon. Only Elfie could pull that off. The funny thing is, this wasn't Elfie's only probe pool as well. Elfie is like one of the most memorable StarCraft players. I feel like he's almost original Haas. Not quite as all-in as Haas, but I remember him pulling probes. I think he did like an Immortal all-in versus Zerg that lasted for 15 minutes once, and he ended up pulling the probes from his main and winning with the probe pool. Like, there were so many times where he won just with like the weirdest little extra thing getting him over the line. So that was sick. Alright guys, so by popular request, we're going to talk about cannon rushes to finish up. The defensive positioning with cannon rushes is its own complete unique beast, but it's something beginners are always asking for, so I figure, hey, this is a beginner basics episode. We're talking about the art of defense. Let's talk about defending cannon rushes. Now, I know it used to really be a big problem as Zerg in Heart of the Swarm in Wings of Liberty. I'm sure a lot of people are still cannoning Zerg. However, I've watched my like what is it, Quasar Printf and like King Cobra and what's the Icelandic guy? There's like a few Pro Tour streamers who literally cannon rush every game, and these guys just throw out the most dirty cannon rushes, and they make it work against Terran as well. I talked to a lot of low-level Terrans who actually struggle with cannon rushes, so I was like, all right, my buddy Chan Kim, my teammate over here, I'm like, please cannon rush me. He's played random at high levels before, so I was like, yeah, you can do like a decent cannon rush, right? And he's like, come on, man, I've never cannon rushed a Terran before. And I was like, oh, okay, well, we'll just see how it goes. And I figure there's going to be a few important points to talk about. So he's coming in and he's doing the dirty. Something which makes me always uncomfortable with this base on All Arena is I want to center my screen on the action, but you're at the edge of the map. So I always just get this like OCD here where I'm like, let me scroll to the left. But that'll do. So he's walling in so that he can get cannons where we can't attack it. Now this is a scenario which a lot of players freak out. They A-move all their SCVs. All the SCVs get stuck behind each other attacking a pylon, and they lose the game. Now, what we're going to notice that I do, first things first, is I pull guys off gas. I just use them to attack straight away. Immediately, whenever you're dealing with an early attack, and this is something you should really be focusing on if it's like a really fast, cheesy attack, gas suddenly becomes not important. Like if they're hitting you in the first 2.5 minutes of the game, or 3 minutes, let's say probably the first 2.5 to 3 minutes of the game, gas is not important. It's literally like just survive, just get out Marines, just get out Zerglings, just get out Zealots or Adepts. Like it's just about staying alive. Gas really kind of falls to the back in terms of priority. So we're pulling off gas first of all. Now, notice we're trying to focus down the pylons. So I pulled 4 SCVs up here. I said, yeah, there's about room for 4 SCVs. Let's take a look. Yeah, to attack that pylon. And the thing is, if you start attacking a pylon with like 4 SCVs the moment it starts, it's going to be pretty close to dying by the time it finishes. However, these pylons, they just don't have a lot of surface area, but we still should be attacking them. Normally, you just want to take it down. So notice we've got these SCVs here. They can't actually reach the pylon. But we're chasing the probe. Now, why are we so adamant on chasing that probe? So, here he comes, this probe. Because he can only fit 2 cannons back there. And, especially if we take this pylon down, we're going to get good surface area on one of the cannons. So it's going to be almost dead by the time it pops. And we're going to have a Marine out by then as well. So how does this get out of control? This gets out of control if he suddenly can put cannons down here. If he can go cannon, pylon there, or cannon, 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 cannon. If he starts just putting cannons everywhere, that's where things get crazy. So you really want to try and block the really good cannon spots. Something you want to visualize is you want to look at a pylon and you want to look at it from your opponent's perspective and say like, where could he put the disgusting cannons? So the moment this goes down, you want to think about this. You want to go like, all right, no, I can't actually show. Basically, this is your power radius. This is your power radius. This is your power radius. And what you always want to think about is most of your damage early on, and it's the same for Zerg and the same for Protoss, most of your damage output is from your workers. That's what you're really defending cannon rushes with. So you want to think about, well, how can he limit my surface area? He's already got space for 2 cannons back there, but where could he put another one? So you always want to look at these areas and you want to say to yourself, what if he puts a cannon here and then blocks it in with a pylon? We can only attack it with like 2 SCVs there, maybe 1 SCV there. That's pretty shit. What if he puts, if we pull these SCVs away, what if he goes like a cannon there with like a pylon in front of it? And then another pylon there, like you're only going to be able to attack it with like 2 SCVs. You want to start visualizing all these annoying spots that it could happen. And if you ever see a spot where you look at it and you're like, that spot is the devil. Like if a cannon gets up there, it's going to be completely surrounded. It's going to be disgusting. If you ever see a devil cannon spot, grab one of your workers and just hold position it on that spot. Do not move it from that spot or tell it to patrol on that spot. Just make sure no matter what, they cannot put that spot down. On certain bases, those spots exist where it's just disgusting if they get it down. Now, something else we could have done to make the situation a lot easier for ourselves, and this is something if you're a lower level player you might really want to do, is just when you first see a probe come in early, just tell an SCV to attack it. Tell a drone to attack it. Just until it leaves your base and then pull it back to mining. That's something you can do as well. However, usually you won't need to. So, focus fire on the pylons the moment they go down. Now notice, I immediately saw this second probe and I attacked an SCV onto it, and then as it tries to come through the mineral line, I'm like, oh, fuck you, mate. Get wrecked. And we tried to attack him, but we actually messed up and we weren't able to block him there. Now, something you're going to notice is workers can mineral walk. We talked about it before. You can click on minerals and they'll just path through other units, right? This is what stops them all getting blocked on each other when they're mining. But it can also be used for them to just dart past your workers and evade death. Now, one thing is, the way that works is this probe always needs to click on a mineral patch in order to walk through. If he's standing here and he wants to go through this little gap in the minerals, there is no mineral patch over there for him to click on. There's no mineral patch at another base, which will try to path him through there. So there's no way to get through these gaps from this side. Now, if he's on this side, he can obviously just click on the minerals on the natural, and the probe will just path straight on through. But what you want to think of is these as your beautiful, beautiful, beautiful choke points. So right there, we could have done something cute where as this probe comes in, we could have grabbed this SCV and just moved it into the choke point. And then that probe would not have been able to move through. He would have been surrounded and he would have died. And that would have saved us wasting all that mining time. But notice we just keep SCVs attacking that probe. We don't want to let him put these cannons up. We've still got this SCV attacking that pylon. This SCV here really should have been focus fired on this pylon. He's idling because SCVs are basically those fucking lazy people who have that like government job in that office where it has a title but no one really knows what they do, and they kind of sit there and they like fill out forms which no one knows what they're for. That's this guy. He just kind of holds his minerals and stands there. Up here we've got SCVs now focusing on the cannon. These SCVs focusing the pylon, and notice we're just constantly just focusing on everything. And here's the number one thing: just immediately put a bunker down in range of all the cannons. So even if they finish, we can just put Marines in there, repair the bunker, and he will be dead. So notice each time a building dies, we're not A moving. That's the number one thing. We're never A moving our units blindly. We're grabbing units equal to roughly the number that will have surface area, and we're attack left clicking. We're going A left click on the specific structures that they can reach. Likewise up here, these SCVs, we just told them to attack on this. Now here we do some cute micro because we're trying to be all fancy. Where, remember we talked about attack priority before and how if your workers stop attacking, they're not a threat. That's exactly what we're using here, and this is something you can always use as both Terran or Zerg. You can't use it as Protoss. Whoops. You can't use it as Protoss because you only have 40 hit points. But because a cannon does 20 damage and an SCV has 45 hit points, you can actually take 2 hits and then just stop command or move your SCV or drone away. Your drone, even though it only has 40 hit points, will instantly regen a life. So it'll get away with 1 life if it's a drone. If you pull it away, the cannon will stop attacking it unless they actually manually focus fire with that cannon. So by pulling those 2 workers off, we saved these 2 workers on low hit points. We pulled that worker away as well, 1 extra hit away from dying. And we just said, all right, just keep pulling SCVs. There's no such thing as overreacting, by the way. If you've got surface area to attack the buildings, just pull all your SCVs. The reason we kept mining in this scenario is there wasn't a lot of surface area back here. But notice he comes in, starts putting more cannons down, and we just go, all right, just keep on massing those cannons, massing those SCVs. Just pull them all, get them into the fight, and get it going. So I see people in chat talking about slow floating to another base. By the way, guys, we're about to just very quickly watch the last replay. It's just another cannon rush, or just a very different... It's just a slightly different scenario of a cannon rush, sorry. So let's take a look at the exact same sort of scenario one more time, just to see if anything is different in this game. I don't think it is. I think this game might have actually been even more one-sided. Let's take a look. Once again, we're just going to pull the SCVs that can attack on each bit. Try to focus down that probe, that extra probe out there, so that he can't just throw cannons down willy-nilly. Willy-nilly. That's a great word. Gonna start Marines. We're a bit slow on our bunker this game, but we've got good surface area on that cannon, so it doesn't matter. Bunker's down now. And it's over. So that one was pretty straightforward. There's one last cannon rush I will show you guys because I know every scenario is slightly different. So we're going to take a look at this one. Yeah. By the way, if you're Protoss and you're defending a cannon rush, this is something... So yeah, guys, shout out your questions in chat. Use the @x5 pig tag because we're about to finish up the show and answer questions. So shout your questions out now if you want them to be answered. But yeah, if you're Protoss, often you can just get the mothership core out in time. So it'll time out as the cannons finish, and a pylon cannon wrecks a photon cannon. And it'll do a decent amount of damage to a second photon cannon as well, I believe. I can't remember the exact maths. So something you can do is just build an extra pylon in range of their cannons on top of your probes that are focusing everything. And as long as you just overcharge that as soon as your mothership core comes out, that really helps you as a Protoss player. Because notice as Terran, even if they surround the cannons, you've got the Marines come out with the bunker. And that's what kind of finishes off the attack. As Protoss, it's having a photon overcharge. Just a single photon overcharge blows everything up and it goes really well. All right, so let's take a look in game. Here we go. So we're going to see one of the more annoying types of cannon rush here, which a lot of players struggle with, where they wall in a lot of cannons at your ramp and just be really annoying down here. So let's take a look. What are we doing? To respond to this, number one, pull off gas. So let's watch on my camera. You can see what I'm selecting in the bottom. Oh, there's pylons. So I'm grabbing SCVs to fight, and I'm saying, okay, notice I only started with a few SCVs, but then I saw and I was like, there's so much surface area. Fuck this guy. Let's just, there's no such thing as overreacting against a cannon rush as long as we've got surface area to do damage. So we're just pulling all the SCVs and we're like, nah, man, there's no way. There's no way we're letting you get away with this douchebaggery. And we're building the bunker there. And we're also thinking, well, this bunker is a good spot to try and block nasty positions. However, you can see we've actually created a nice little choke point. So if you put cannon there, like, it might be a little bit of a pain. That being said, as long as we focus on these pylons, that's the important thing. So we've gone, okay, 4 SCVs, focus that pylon. You guys focus that pylon. You guys focus that pylon. And notice there's only one SCV at the back that's derping around. So being able to quickly pass up your SCVs and split them onto different buildings, one of the most important pieces of micro in defending this. And notice as soon as we broke through, we are focusing on the cannons as well. Getting these SCVs to drill the crap out of those. And even though we're going to lose a few SCVs down here, that's okay, because your opponent has always cut a lot of economy to do this, or usually they have anyway. It kind of depends. If this was hitting 30 seconds later, and he just built a normal economy, and he actually had like a thriving mineral line and gases going down, we really wouldn't want to be losing SCVs. But as it is, we hold it. Extra Marines are out in the bunkers. We can go back to mining. Remember, pull off gas. Gas is not important in early rushes. Get the surface area. Put as many SCVs on each building as possible. Build a bunker in range. Easy peasy, mushroom squeezy. Alright guys, that's the end of today's daily. So we're just going to answer a few questions to finish things up. And that should be good. There's always a few audio files complaining about my mic. Guys, it's something on the list of things which I will be fixing up. But unfortunately, I do not know how to use mic very good. So I'm just having to make do with my pleb audio for the moment, but in the next few weeks, hopefully I'll get some time to, I don't know, steal someone who knows something about microphones and actually get something set up. Okay, so I don't think there's too many questions further up. If you posted one earlier in the daily, just repost it now with the X5 pig tag so that it highlights it for me. RiboFlavin says, do you think the Terran Liberator unit should have reduced movement speed? No, I think Liberators are okay-ish, but that's such a complex discussion around the Liberator, so that's a bit tough. I think generally with Liberators, maps should just be designed to make sure there's always plenty of space behind the mineral lines, or at least a decent amount of space. I think the only real problem with Liberators right now is that some maps, there's really abusive positions for them. Nice little bits of high ground for them to sit on, where if you don't have vision, it can just zone out mining, that sort of stuff. Coolbum says, how about a toss that macro cannon rushes into sky toss? How many workers should I leave on minerals when the cannon rush occurs? What a peculiar question. One of the things that you see there is like, it doesn't matter what they're doing in their follow-up. Because what we're doing is we're overcomplicating the situation. And even from that comment, I can see trauma. I can see the pain in your eyes, Cool Bum. I can see that you've experienced dying to Skytoss, and it's tainted your mentality with these emotional woes and challenges. So what you got to say to yourself is, I'm a strong, independent StarCraft player. I don't take shit from no one. Seriously though, like I'm joking, but it's actually true. Like, a Protoss going Skytoss has nothing to do with a cannon rush. Absolutely nothing. At the moment a cannon rush occurs, the Protoss could be doing anything behind that. What is the important part of your question is, you said, what if the Protoss is doing a macro cannon rush? So what if they're just trying to do damage and buy time? Still overreact. Always overreact rather than underreact. The only way a cannon rush comes out ahead is if you let the cannons get up. If you pull workers against, let's say they cannon in your third base, way away, they build like a single cannon, you're not even thinking about taking your third, and you pull all your workers to attack a single photon cannon, like, yeah, that's a scenario where you're going to get behind, because, well, the cannon wasn't even threatening you, so why'd you pull workers off mining to go attack it? But in any normal scenario, if this is in your natural, your main base, kill it straight away. It doesn't matter if you pulled too many workers. Yes, if it's just a single photon cannon, a single probe, a single pylon, don't pull your entire worker line. But you can do this by feel. But it's always better to shut it down and then go back into macro, whereas rather than being distracted. Sometimes players get too focused on the idea of, let's toe the line of greed, because that's what pro players do. Therefore, I'm going to pull 2 SCVs to deal with a cannon rush. And you're like, no! Because the moment the aggression goes on, the moment you give your opponent room to stay in your base, you're going to be distracted. You're going to start making mistakes. Everything's going to start falling apart for you. So it's always better to overinvest in defense just a little bit. You know, just crush it. Shut it down so that you can put your full focus back on your macro, on your economy. It's not just about how much you invested in terms of lost mining time to shut it down. It's how quickly can you get back to focusing on your economy. It's where your APM lies, where your focus lies. That's just as important of a resource as a little bit of extra minerals from lost mining time. CC Jensen says, I've recently been struggling against proxy 3-racks as Zerg. I normally open 17 hatch, 17 gas, 17 pool. Do you have any advice? You can always just speed your pool up one supply there. No reason not to. If you want to start drone scouting, that's a good way to defend against 3-racks. But really, it's just practicing micro for the most part. If you're not drone scouting, you want to get a little bit of forward warning. So one good way to do that is just to send a drone scout out. I think a minute 40 is the game timer, where you send it out front your natural, you check for like Marines and SCVs coming in. So as long as you see them coming in at the right time, start building Zerglings, pull off gas, once again, is a very important way to hold that. So pulling off gas against those really early rushes, because Zergling speed's not going to kick in time. So pull off gas, pull drones, don't let bunkers get up, try to surround the Marines. If you just really work on that micro, that's going to help you out a lot. And one of the best ways against early cheese rushes to get good against it is to practice against it a bunch of times in a row. So this goes for any guys out there of any race. Get a friend to practice it against you. Get the cheesy bastard on ladder, be like, GG, well played. I respect your skill. It doesn't matter how much you hate the guy, how much you're seething. Compliment him on his skill, ask him for a few custom games, and if you can get a little bit of focused practice against it, you're going to get really good at it, and then you can shit all over it the next time you're playing him on ladder. Nick Land says, when the cannon was being attacked by your bunker, you saved 2 SCVs. Did you save them again with hold position? Because the cannon was receiving damage from the bunker. Yeah, I actually just pulled them away, but hold position would do the same thing there. So anytime you stop attacking with a worker, their threat goes down. So the cannon, unless it's purposefully microed on the workers, it will automatically attack an actual attacking unit, bunker, spine crawler instead. So you can do that with drones and SCVs, as we pointed out. All right, guys, so we're going to finish up. Are there any good questions to finish off with? Any... All right, so there's a few other questions about specific scenarios. We're going to talk about those in a different daily. We're going to come back and revisit this topic, but I think that's good for now. I think we've done a pretty long episode. We've covered a lot of different things, so hopefully this helps out a lot. I'm going to go through, if you guys, I see there's a few questions there, so we can keep talking about that over the next minute or two, but I'm going to finish up the YouTube VOD here. Okay, guys, so we're going to announce a new ICFAR tomorrow during the show. We will be commentating tomorrow's ICFAR, so don't forget to tune in for that. It is going to be us casting games with players who are only allowed to attack when at least half of their army was dropped. So that should be cool. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course punch a cactus to the moon. I'll catch you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.